We don't need whistleblowers here. That's what Trevor Lane told me as he slid my termination notice across the desk like he was handing me a coffee receipt. My name's Henry Malloy. I'm 46 years old and had been the lead foreman at Mason Ridge Construction's biggest job site in Spokane until 5 minutes ago. 23 years in the industry, 16 of them as a foreman. Never once written up, and now, fired for doing exactly what I was hired to do, keep people safe. I didn't say a word, just took off my hard hat and placed it quietly on his desk. The trailer smelled like burnt coffee and paper toner. Outside, I could still hear the hum of machinery, crews pouring concrete and wiring panels. Men I trained, men I trusted, men now working inches from unmarked hazards and unsecured scaffolding. I wouldn't be there next week when they moved to steel erection. Wouldn't be able to stop the next near miss, or worse. Trevor leaned back in his chair, trying to act like he wasn't rattled. You're a buy, the book guy, Henry. I get it. But deadlines are deadlines. I didn't respond. People like him feed off pushback, use it to justify what they do. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. I just nodded, walked out, and started clearing my locker. Because deep down, I already knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The air outside the site trailer felt heavier that morning. Not because of the thick gray clouds rolling in over Spokane, but because I knew what I was leaving behind. I'd spent 5 years turning Mason Ridge's safety record around. Clean audits, proper protocols, even got our insurance premiums reduced. But none of that mattered now. Not to Trevor. Not to the new upper management pushing this schedule first garbage. I walked across the site with my duffel over my shoulder, passing the same crews I'd trained over the years. I saw good men, fathers, veterans, kids just trying to make an honest living, installing wiring next to live junction boxes with no signage, no lockout procedures. Welders up on the 3rd floor working without edge guards or proper harness checks. Every corner being cut, and nobody daring to speak up. I didn't blame them. They had families to feed. I was lucky. Elaine and I had some savings. But they were one bad fall away from losing everything. Keith Ramirez, our senior electrician, jogged over to me just before I hit my truck. You really gone, Henry? I gave a slow nod, because of the safety reports. He cursed under his breath, looked down, then back up. That's messed up, man. What are you going to do now? I glanced back at the site. I could see Trevor pacing up near the steel laydown yard, already barking at the framing crew about delays. And I thought about what I should have done 3 weeks ago, when the first safety violation got ignored. I'm going to do what I should have done then, I said. Let me tell you something about how I got here. I started in this business pushing a broom and hauling rebar when I was 19. Worked my way through framing, electrical drywall, eventually into management. My old man was a steelworker and butt, tough as nails, but he never came home the same after that fall. Broke his back in 3 places when his supervisor rushed the crew and skipped installing a second set of guardrails. I was 12. He never worked again. Never stood straight again either. That stayed with me. So when I became foreman, I made one rule crystal clear: everyone goes home. No exceptions. Not on my watch. Mason Ridge hired me during a rough patch. String of minor accidents had spooked their insurer. I came in, cleaned house, instituted mandatory walkthroughs, toolbox talks, spot checks. I didn't win any popularity contests, but I earned the crew's respect. And the suits upstairs liked that incident rates were down and productivity was up. Then came the Riverview Towers job, a $15 million, a tight 7-month timeline. That's when Trevor Lane showed up, some hotshot from the Seattle office with a shiny MBA and 0 time on a scaffold. First week, he was all smiles. Called me safety guru, shook hands with the crew, bought lunch for the site. By the 2nd week, the mask slipped. Do we really need to inspect every harness daily? He asked. Yes, I answered. Because it's the law. Next day, this containment setup looks excessive. Let's ease up. These guys know how to be careful. Every time he tried to push a shortcut, I pushed back, seated the regs, showed him the stats, told him about my dad. He'd smile, but it never reached his eyes. Then one morning I caught him telling the crew during briefing, just get it done. Whatever it takes. I pulled him aside, closed the trailer door. Trevor, you can't say stuff like that. These aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. These are lives. He leaned in close and said, that's the problem, Henry. You think this is your site. From that moment, I started documenting everything. Photos of missing guardrails. Videos of crew members working near unsealed chemical drums. Emails where Trevor dismissed concerns. Conversations recorded quietly, legally. I wasn't trying to start a war. I just wanted backup. I wanted someone to care, but no one responded. Not HR, not safety compliance, just silence. The final straw came that Tuesday morning. I showed up early to inspect the new scaffolding on the west side. Found 3 of our youngest guys, barely out of trade school, working 20 feet up with no guardrails, no fall protection, not even a net. I stopped everything. Sent them to gear up. Started installing temp rails myself. Trevor stormed in minutes later. "What the hell, Henry? Why aren't they working?" "No fall protection," I said, bolting a rail into place. "We're already behind. The client walks the site tomorrow. Then it's a good thing nobody fell and died before their visit." He got real close. "You're too comfortable. The industry's changing. We can't gold plate every regulation." I stood and faced him. "We're not gold plating. We're following the law." He smirked. "Only when OSHA's around. That's when I saw it." He didn't misunderstand. He didn't need education, he just didn't care. So I made a decision right then and there. That afternoon I filed a formal report to the corporate safety officer. Attached every bit of documentation I had. Photos, emails, incident logs. The whole file. I figured once they saw how bad it had gotten, they'd have to act. I was wrong. The next morning, I got a call to report to Trevor's office. And 5 minutes later, I was out of a job. For the first few days after I was let go, I kept expecting someone from Mason Ridge's corporate office to reach out. Maybe to apologize. Maybe to clarify the misunderstanding. But nothing came. No emails. No phone calls. Just silence. Then the smear campaign started. It began small. An email circulating among some of the site crews claiming I had misrepresented time logs and breached internal protocols. A week later, someone forwarded me a memo that went out to the entire regional division. It labeled me a former employee terminated for policy violations and warned staff not to discuss confidential project matters with me or anyone unauthorized. Policy violations. I'd spent 2 decades teaching guys to fill out those same logs to double-check timesheets and verify man-hours down to the minute. Now they were saying I'd falsified them. I wasn't just angry. I was stunned. They were trying to bury me. Make sure no one believed a word I said. The damage wasn't just to my job, it was to my name. That's when the phone calls started. Quiet ones, from old crew members. "Henry," said Martin, "our drywall lead. They're rewriting site protocols. Took your old checklists and tossed them. Brought in some guy named Glenn. Doesn't know left from right. And they're forcing us to sign new NDAs. Or NDAs? Yeah. Anyone caught talking about site operations to outsiders gets written up or worse. They're locking it all down." Another call, this time from Lyle in HVAC. 3 guys got sick from the solvent fumes in the east wing. There's no ventilation. Trevor's pushing the drywallers through anyway. Every call told the same story: shortcuts, cover-ups, pressure, and fear. I tried calling OSHA, got a polite clerk, probably overworked and underpaid. She gave me the usual spiel: anonymous tips welcome. If you have documentation, file a formal report. Timelines vary. Timelines, bureaucracy. Meanwhile, guys were breathing in toxic fumes and welding over open power lines, so I took a different route. I drove down to the local OSHA office in person, walked in with a folder 3 inches thick, photos dated and labeled, printed emails showing ignored safety alerts, voice transcripts from site meetings, even copies of old inspection reports with Trevor's edits scribbled in the margins. Delay this, scrub that, too much detail. The guy at the desk, his name was Warren, flipped through the first few pages, eyebrows rising higher with each one. He asked me to sit down, asked if I'd be willing to testify if this went to formal investigation. I said yes. He nodded slowly. "You've built a very compelling case, Mr. Malloy. We'll begin preliminary inquiries." That gave me hope. But not for long, because the next day Mason Ridge's legal department emailed me a cease and desist. They claimed I had unlawfully retained proprietary materials, accused me of violating company policy by distributing them, and demanded immediate return of all documents. What they didn't expect was that I'd anticipated that move. See, before I ever went to OSHA, I consulted with a friend, Emily Forster, a construction law attorney I'd met at a training seminar in Billings. She told me to keep everything backed up, dated, and on a private drive. She also helped me write a whistleblower protection letter, time-stamped and delivered before I filed anything. So when Mason Ridge came at me with legal threats, Emily sent them a reply that shut them down cold. Any retaliatory action taken against Mr. Malloy, she wrote, will constitute obstruction of a federal investigation and violate whistleblower protection statutes under 29 CFR and 190436. In plain terms, back off, or you're getting audited. Still, the company didn't stop there. They doubled down. They pulled my name from internal recognition awards, removed my name from past site photos, and even updated old safety newsletters to erase my contributions. It was as if they were trying to delete me from existence. I wasn't surprised, but I was deeply disappointed. I had helped build Mason Ridge's safety culture from the ground up. I wasn't perfect, but I fought for what mattered. And now, because I dared to stand up to a project manager cutting corners, I'd become public enemy no one. But they didn't realize something. You can discredit a man's name, but you can't erase the truth. By the end of that second week, I got a call from Warren at OSHA. We're moving into the formal investigation phase. But we need more. Any chance you know someone still inside who might be willing to talk? I did. And that boss is where things were about to turn. 2 days after OSHA went formal, I drove out to a small coffee shop just off Highway 2 to meet a man I hadn't spoken to in over 5 years. His name was Derek Flanders, former site supervisor for Mason Ridge. Once respected, even feared for running tight, clean sites. That was before he got railroaded out of the company after calling out a faulty crane installed back in 2018. They'd called it insubordination, but everyone on the inside knew the truth. He'd flagged a mechanical issue that would have taken the crane offline for 2 days, and the execs didn't want delays. So they pinned the delay on him and kicked him out with a black mark on his name. I remember the day he left. No handshake, no send-off, just silence like he never existed. When I walked into that cafe and saw him, he gave a short nod and motioned for me to sit. Same hardened eyes, same crew cut. A little more gray around the temples, maybe, but still the same Derek. I figured it was only a matter of time, he said before I even opened my mouth. They're doing it again, I said. Worse this time. NDA's retaliation. Even tried to shut me down legally. He sipped his coffee. Let me guess, Trevor Lane. I nodded. He chuckled grimly. Corporate parasite with a clipboard. I pulled out my folder, showed him the evidence, the reports, photos. The OSHA letter confirming the start of the investigation. Derek flipped through page after page in silence. When he got to the documentation showing forced overtime with no fault protection, he shook his head. They never learn, he said. They just hide it better. That's when he pulled out something I didn't expect. A small flash drive. He slid it across the table. I've been holding on to this, he said. Didn't know who to trust with it, but I think I do now. On that drive, old internal emails, safety inspection logs that mysteriously disappeared from the Mason Ridge server after his firing, project reports edited by the same execs now covering for Trevor. He even had audio recordings, discussions between then VP Mark Halston and site managers pushing them to skip inspections and smooth over violations. It wasn't just Trevor. It was a culture. A top-down rot that stretched years back. And now we had proof. I spent the next 3 days working with Emily, my attorney, cataloging every file from Derek's drive. We submitted a supplemental packet to OSHA and the Department of Labor. This wasn't just a site-level problem anymore. It was shaping up to be a systemic cover-up across multiple states. That same week, 2 more former Mason Ridge foremen reached out. One from Idaho Falls, the other from Missoula. Both had left under questionable circumstances. Both had similar stories. Both had documentation. We pooled it all together. Created a centralized, time-stamped archive. Names, dates, inspection failures, altered documents. It wasn't just circumstantial. It was organized negligence. And it was about to come to light. But even as the walls started closing in on Mason Ridge, I kept thinking about something that still didn't sit right the day I was fired. The way Trevor smirked as if he knew no one above him would stop him. It wasn't just arrogance. It was certainty. Then it hit me. Trevor wasn't just acting on his own. He had cover from the top, so I did a little digging. I reached out to an old colleague, Janice Dorsey, who had quietly moved to the corporate office in Seattle after years on the site admin side. She owed me a favor from back in 2015, when I helped cover her shifts during a family emergency. She called me late that night, voice low, almost a whisper. "Henry," she said, "I don't know how deep it goes, but your name was flagged weeks before you got fired. There was a meeting executive level. Not just about you, about a handful of high-risk employees across regional divisions. All the names had something in common. What? They all filed safety complaints. I felt my jaw tighten. It wasn't Trevor, I asked. Oh, Trevor's just the hatchet man. The real directive came from the executive VP, Gerald Vaughn. Now I knew who had to be held accountable. Not just the project managers playing with workers' lives, but the suits who signed off on the shortcuts. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't even just about Mason Ridge. It was about every single crew member who got told to just keep working when they knew something was wrong. About the guy who fell, the welder who got burned, the painter who passed out from fumes. The company had spent years quietly silencing those voices. Now we were turning up the volume. With Janice's confirmation about Gerald Vaughn's direct involvement, the puzzle pieces locked into place. It wasn't just rogue site managers turning a blind eye. It was a coordinated effort from the top, a full-scale suppression of safety concerns that had probably been going on for years across multiple regions. And now we had the receipts. Emily, my attorney, wasted no time. She submitted a detailed complaint not just to OSHA, but also to the Department of Labor and the Attorney General's office in Washington State. It wasn't just about workplace violations anymore. It was now about federal contractor fraud, negligence, and corporate malfeasance. That's when things started moving fast. The following week, Warren from OSHA reached back out. Mr. Malloy, he said, your file has been flagged for accelerated review. Based on what we've received, we're assigning a field investigator and opening a full audit into Mason Ridge construction. That meant subpoenas. That meant surprise inspections. That meant the executive suit could no longer sweep anything under the rug. But Mason Ridge didn't go down quietly. First, they tried to spin the story. Local news stations ran a piece quoting company spokespersons calling the whistleblower claims disgruntled ex-employee exaggerations. Then came the press release, a glossy statement filled with words like commitment, transparency, and industry-leading compliance, complete with a staged photo of Trevor smiling on site with workers in pristine hard hats. It was all smoke and mirrors. What they didn't expect, what they couldn't control, was what came next. One morning, just before 8 a.m., an unmarked black SUV rolled into the Riverview Towers site. Out stepped 3 OSHA agents in reflective vests and a federal investigator from the Department of Labor. No warning, no call ahead, just boots on the ground and clipboards in hand. Within hours, work on 2 floors was shut down due to improper ventilation and exposed electrical. Safety logs mysteriously went missing. And when the agents asked about crew certifications, several expired licenses surfaced, 2 of them forged. Word traveled fast across every Mason Ridge site in the region. And then the real crack appeared. A young apprentice named Jesse Morales, just 22, working on his second job site, filed his own formal complaint. He'd passed out from chemical exposure 2 weeks prior and was forced back to work the next day. No medical clearance, no review. His mom contacted a local union rep, who in turn reached out to the media. By the end of the week, we weren't just looking at OC citations. We were staring down the barrel of a full-on class action lawsuit. I found myself in a room I never thought I'd be in, a televised deposition. Emily sat beside me as I was asked to walk through everything from the first red flag Trevor ignored to the moment I realized Vaughn was orchestrating a cover-up. Every document I'd gathered, every testimony I'd collected, every time I was threatened, fired, or silenced, it all came out. And I didn't hold back. Neither did Derek, who sat for his own deposition a day later. His testimony about being blacklisted, about disappearing reports and corporate pressure, aligned perfectly with mine. By the third week and a half, dozen more former foremen had stepped forward. The tide had turned, public pressure mounted. The media picked it up. Headlines read, "Whistleblower exposes construction giant for widespread safety failures. Former Mason Ridge employee says they knew and did nothing." One outlet even aired an audio clip from Derek's flash drive. Mark Halston clearly instructing a manager to close the inspection logs before Monday. There was no walking it back after that. Mason Ridge scrambled. Vaughn was placed on administrative leave, then quietly resigned 2 days later. Trevor, he vanished. No LinkedIn updates, no phone calls returned. Word was, he'd lawyered up. But for the men and women still out there in hard hats and steel-toe boots, the real victory wasn't in a headline. It was in the change that followed. Multiple job sites were suspended. Contractors reevaluated. Safety walkthroughs became daily practice, not quarterly formalities. And a regional task force was formed to audit third-party certifications, something that hadn't been done in years. Then came the phone call I didn't expect. The board of directors, what remained of them, asked me to return. Not to the same job. They offered something more. Director of Compliance and Field Safety Operations. A top-down role. No more begging middle managers to care. I'd have real authority, real power to stop things before they spun out of control. Full budget, full autonomy. I asked for 48 hours to think about it. That night I stood in my garage, flipping through a binder of the first safety reports I'd written nearly a decade earlier. My handwriting was sloppy. My ideas were bold, maybe even naive. But the core belief was always the same. Every worker deserves to go home at the end of the day. I called them back the next morning. Only under one condition, I said.
What's that?
I hire my own team. Because I knew exactly who I was calling first. Derek. I made 5 phone calls that morning. Each to someone I trusted, each to someone Mason Ridge had discarded, overlooked, or quietly pushed out over the years. Derek answered before the first ring ended. You serious? He said after I explained the offer. Dead serious, I replied. They want me back as director of compliance. I said I'd only take it if I could build my own team. There was a pause on the line. Then let's do it right this time. By the end of the week, we had a team of 7: Derek, Martin from drywall, Lyle from HVAC, Janice, who'd since resigned from corporate after turning whistleblower, plus 2 sharp young safety analysts who'd cut their teeth in the public sector and were tired of watching private firms cut corners. And me. We didn't ask for fancy titles. We asked for field access, real-time reporting privileges, and the ability to halt a site if necessary. The board, still scrambling for public redemption, gave us everything we asked for, and so began what I called the rebuild phase. We started at the Riverview Towers site, where it all began. The first day back was uncomfortable. Some workers nodded in support. Others gave me sideways glances, unsure if I was one of them again. I didn't blame them. Trust wasn't earned by returning, it had to be rebuilt. So we rolled up our sleeves. No offices, no remote reviews. We worked from the site trailers, ate lunch with the crews, walked every floor, inspected every harness, checked every scaffold joint, reviewed every ventilation route. And we didn't just point out problems, we taught. I ran a pop-up safety workshop in the break area that week, voluntary attendance. Expected maybe 8 or 10 guys. Over 40 showed up. We walked through real scenarios: what happens when a solvent isn't properly labeled, how to spot a falsified inspection tag, how to use a smartphone to log violations anonymously. Derek even built a simple QR code-based reporting tool. No names, no red tape, just instant flagging of issues that fed directly to our dashboard. Within 2 weeks, site safety incidents dropped by 67%. That number didn't lie. We were making progress. But change didn't come without pushback. One afternoon, a regional site lead, someone who'd stayed loyal to Trevor, stormed into our trailer. You're slowing everything down with your rules, he snapped. This job's got a timeline. I stood up, looked him square in the eye and said, and these people have families. That's the only deadline I care about. He left. We didn't see him again. 2 weeks later, he resigned. Word spread. This wasn't a return to the old Mason Ridge. This was something new. We called it SafeCore, a culture-first approach that made compliance personal, not bureaucratic. We didn't just enforce rules. We explained why they mattered and gave teams ownership of the process. Janice designed new on-site protocols, Derek handled field training, and our analysts used collected data to adapt procedures in real time. We even looped in Jesse Morales, the young apprentice who'd filed his own OSHA complaint. After he recovered, we brought him in to help develop orientation content for new hires. No one knew the stakes like he did. By the 3rd month, something incredible happened. Mason Ridge won a Safety Excellence Award from the state's Department of Labor, the first in its 27-year history. The inspectors noted radical improvements in safety reporting, cultural accountability, and preventive education. That plaque didn't go on a boardroom wall. We mounted it in the break room, because it belonged to the crew, not the executives. Looking back, there was a time I wanted nothing more than to walk away from Mason Ridge forever. And I would have, if all I'd cared about was revenge. But that's not what this was ever about. This was about protecting people who'd been ignored, about using everything I'd learned, The good, the bad, and the heartbreaking, to build something that would last beyond my own time here. So I stayed. Not because I owed Mason Ridge anything, but because I owed it to the ones who'd risked their necks on every scaffold, poured every foundation, braved every thunderstorm in a harness and steel toes. They were the soul of this company. All I did was help bring the heartbeat back. 6 months later, I stood on the top floor of Riverview Towers as the final panel of glass was lowered into place. The skyline shimmered. The site was quiet, safe. I looked around and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Pride without fear. Crews walking tall, knowing they mattered. Protocols followed not out of obligation, but belief. This wasn't the same Mason Ridge that fired me. It was better. And not because of any title I held, but because the right people were finally allowed to do the right thing. I never wanted revenge. I wanted respect restored. To the men and women who build America with their hands and their backs, day after day, we gave them a voice, and more importantly, we listened. In a world that too often praises profit over people, never underestimate the quiet power of standing your ground. Integrity might not make headlines, but it can change everything. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand alone for what was right? And if you believe stories like this matter, stories of dignity, of second chances, of doing it right, then hit that subscribe button and help us keep telling them. Because the world needs more Henrys. And maybe, just maybe, you're one of them. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true stories that speak to the heart.